Ahoy, digital world, and welcome back to yet another episode of Spliced In Later. I hope you all are doing well out there, wherever you are in the world, particularly in places in the world at the moment which are completely fucked at the moment. We won't be talking about it here on this channel, that's not what we do, but a brief mention though to all the people that are currently suffering at the moment due to the maniacness of some crazy fucker. Godspeed, all the best, and if you want to help, send money, all of that stuff. It's screwy at the moment. It's really bad. It almost made me not want to do an episode today because it's a very bleak outlook for the world when stuff like this is going on. But may as well persevere and focus on something else, something that is guaranteed to bring a smile to our faces and keep us happy. And in this world, in Spliced In Later's world, that's movies and TV shows. As I said, I will be reviewing The Batman. However, I have not seen it yet, so I cannot review it. But I thought for this episode, I would, recommend or at least gush over something that I think 90% of you have already seen, and maybe 10% of you are just waiting for a reason to see. And that is the Peter Jackson trilogy based on J.R.R. Tolkien's very famous book series, The Lord of the Rings. Yes, I know everybody knows about this. There's not much point. I'm not breaking any prejudices or minds here by saying, did you know that there are 3 movies based on The Lord of the Rings and they're the greatest movies of all time? But I will go on record here on Spliced In Later. I've often said that I don't know what the best movies of all time are. And while these movies are definitely in my top 100, near the top 10 for sure, it is something that I am willing to die on by saying that at the very least, this is the greatest trilogy that has ever been made. A perfect story from start to finish with superior quality across all 3 films, a good story that does not have any points where it drops or the quality shifts or anything like that. It's truly great stuff. So I don't think this episode will go too long. I'm not going to go through each movie in this trilogy, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, and go through each plot and what I liked and my favorite bits and all of that stuff, because we'd be here forever, because boy oh boy is there a lot to talk about. Instead, I'm basically just going to give reasons why you should watch it if you haven't seen it, while praising certain bits as we go along, because I have a 100% success rate when it comes to recommending this trilogy, including myself. I didn't want to see it when it originally came out because I didn't give 2 shits about The Lord of the Rings, which we'll get into in a minute. But I loved these films, and then I'd recommend them, and I've had friends who have gone, I tried to read the books, it's not really for me, it seems like too much, I don't really care. They've gone and watched it, come back and gone, oh my god, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen, that's insane. Even my mother, who for years I've said to her, you need to watch these movies, they're good, you'll like them. It was always, it's not really my cup of tea, whatever. Finally got her to watch the first film, and then within a couple of weeks, all 3 had been watched. And not just all 3, but the extended editions. Each movie near 4 hours apiece. It takes up 12 hour non-stop viewing, basically, if you were going to marathon it all. And now, God, great. There was something special, there's something unique about those movies that pulled me in. So, if you haven't seen it, you're missing out. You got to check this stuff out. If you're unfamiliar, if you don't know what I'm talking about, Jesus, okay. Well, from 2001 to 2003, on a yearly basis, Peter Jackson released an installment from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, each movie based on a book from the Lord of the Rings trilogy of books, written by J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien is a very famous writer who has created a lot of books set in this world of Middle-earth, but he's also done some other stuff. I haven't looked at his work extensively, because as we'll get into, I have trouble reading his stuff, but we will get to that. I'm sure most of you will have read The Hobbit simply because you went to school. Everybody read The Hobbit when they were in school. The Hobbit is a much easier read than The Lord of the Rings, but it is also a prequel, or I guess the beginning of the story of The Lord of the Rings, which itself got adapted into 3 movies for its own, which is a bit mind-boggling. There's substantially less in The Hobbit than there is in the Lord of the Rings books, and yet each book in the Lord of the Rings only got 1 movie apiece. The Hobbit, which is a much smaller book, aimed at a younger audience, got stretched into 3 movies, each running over 2.5 hours long. If you get the extended editions, that's almost 4 hours there, which we won't talk too much about The Hobbit here, but it's a little crazy when you think about it. But it took the world by storm, whether people were anxiously waiting for the Lord of the Rings to come out or were just looking for a new movie to watch and saw this fantasy thing going on. When people saw the Fellowship of the Ring, they immediately fell in love with this world, with the characters, mainly with the way it was portrayed via Peter Jackson, the look of the film, the feel of the film, the actors, Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Andy Serkis, all putting 120% into this story. And since all three films were basically filmed back-to-back in New Zealand, they were able to come out at a regular basis. The Two Towers came out in 2002, Return of the King came out in 2003, for a perfect, complete story. Not only was it well recognized among the community, among people going to the movies, that this was great, it was also reaping in the awards of the Academy, which in many cases was unheard of, especially to this day. It doesn't feel like we've taken the steps forward that we took when Lord of the Rings was winning Academy Awards. Now, anything to do with fantasy, science fiction, superheroes, unless it's in rare cases, these movies don't get nominated for any Academy Awards except in the usual, the visual effects department or the cinematography or something like that. If you are familiar with this year's nominations for the 2022 Academy Awards, Dune has been included in that. I don't expect Dune to win. It would be nice if it did, but I don't think so. It may only be there because Denis Villeneuve is a very prolific director, but then Denis Villeneuve didn't even get Best Director nomination for the Academy Awards, so the whole thing's bullshit. The Academy Awards have been bullshit for years. Means nothing. Whether you have an Academy Award or not, who's really recognizing you? Just a group of old white guys. And they suck. Anyway, it was different for this point though, because The Return of the King not only won 9 Academy Awards when it was at the award ceremony, it also won the Best Picture. Return of the King, the third film in a trilogy of films about a magical ring being carried by a hobbit, backed by elves and dwarves, and a little shrunken Andy Serkis to defeat a terrible power by running from orcs. And there's also giant walking trees, and zombie creatures. There's so much there going on. The fact that it won is astounding. But of course, it should win because the effort put into these films and the final result is truly remarkable. Now, the main thing I think we have to get past here is getting over that prejudice of going, I don't want to watch The Lord of the Rings because it doesn't interest me, it's not my cup of tea, or I tried to read the books and the books I could not get into, so I don't feel like I would enjoy the movies. That's the thing we have to get by, because I understand that. I recently tried to reread the Lord of the Rings books. And when I say reread, I mean actually read them from start to finish and make it to the end. Because good Lord, I've tried. I pride myself on actually liking to read. I read a lot more in my youth than I do now. I think I've stepped towards movies and TV content and that type of storytelling that it's hard to go back. But when I was youth, any young adult stories, any science fiction stories, any fantasy stories, stuff like that, I would read and reread them constantly. I've reread Game of Thrones more times than I can count. Harry Potter. I've even read The Hunger Games. I read a couple of Twilight books as well. There's a lot there. Rowan of Rin, the Emily Rodder stories and things. There's a lot that I used to read. They're just not coming to my mind right now because I don't script out my episodes. When I talk, I just talk until I can't talk no more. And I have read The Hobbit because we had to. And The Hobbit is an easier read than The Lord of the Rings. But you try and sit down and read The Fellowship of the Ring, and even when you've seen the movies and you know that the content is there and what is actually being written is good, it's just so overwhelming. I recently only got as far as the chapter with Tom Bombadil for The Fellowship of the Ring, which is a good 300, 400 pages. And during that time, the only things that really happen is Bilbo Baggins has a birthday party, then he leaves, and then Frodo decides he's going to take the ring to meet Gandalf at the Sign of the Prancing Pony. And then he wanders around for a bit with Sam, his loyal friend. They pick up Merry and Pippin. There's a lot of singing, there's a lot of dreaming, there's a lot of talking, and everyone talks in a mannerism that is very unique to Tolkien. He had a way of writing the way these characters in this world of Middle-earth talk with each other that I just can't get into. It doesn't... as I said, I can see now, having seen the movies, I understand what's there, but it doesn't pull me in. I'm not enraptured in the world. Now, that's probably me. You talk to anyone who likes the Lord of the Rings books and they'll say, well, I guess you're an idiot, which is entirely possible. But I think as well, you have to really appreciate Tolkien's writing, and you really have to be in the mood to read The Lord of the Rings. Not to do it out of necessity because you feel you have to read it, but because you generally like the way the story is written, the pacing, the uniqueness of it all, because the world of the book is different to the movies. There's a different sense of it. The hobbits are not the childlike, innocent creatures that you see in the Lord of the Rings movie. In the books, they're like thousands of years old, and they're always singing, and they're a bit nasty to each other. There's a different translation. There's stuff that had to be stripped out to put it in the movies so people would like it. And therein lies my recommendation to watch the movies if you are like me and just can't get through the books. All of that, I don't want to say padding, but all of that heaviness, all of that extensiveness when it comes into the very slow pace of getting the characters from point A to point B to point C. Yeah, it's updated for a modern audience, or at least an audience that's not ready to dive into Tolkien's brain. It is a much more receptive nature, the movies are, than the books. So that's my point. If you're struggling with the books, don't feel like you won't like the movies because of it. It's a different ballgame entirely. It even works the opposite way. My father loves the Lord of the Rings books. He's the reason I saw the Lord of the Rings as a kid. In 2001, I did not want to see any movie less. I had tried to read the books, didn't really like them. Of course, I was, 10, 9? It wasn't really for me. But also saw the trailers and I'm like, oh, orcs are scary. This is a scary movie. I don't want to see that. And he's like, you have to see it. It's Lord of the Rings. It's going to be the greatest movie ever. Of course, by the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, I had fallen in love with the Fellowship, with Frodo Baggins, with Samwise Gamgee, with all the characters and the story, and I wanted to know what happened with the ring and if they were going to throw it into Mount Doom or not. And my dad went, that kind of sucked. That was nothing like the book. The book's so much better. Where was Tom Bombadil? If you don't know who I'm talking about Tom Bombadil, you're not missing much. And that is a very controversial cliff that I will die on. So there's that point. The movies are very receptive. They are made for a general audience. They are done in a way that anyone can appreciate it, whether you're a fan of fantasy and science fiction or you just love a good story. My mother likes Harry Potter more than Lord of the Rings, and she saw a lot of things in there that she could accumulate to Harry Potter, which helped her enjoy it. So there's something there for everybody. Furthermore, these are just very well made films that just completely pull you in, and it's a sign of the time from 2001 to 2003. There's a charm, there's a time capsule nature to them that makes them good. If you don't know what the plot of Lord of the Rings is, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, basically it is set in a world of Middle Earth where there are all sorts of creatures that live all abouts, but there's this one all-powerful demon creature thing called Sauron who has forged an all-powerful ring, the one ring to rule them all. When he wears this ring, he's unstoppable. In a war fought many, many years ago, he was defeated, he lost the ring, but instead of the ring being destroyed, it corrupted the heart of the king of men who had it, so he kept it for himself. Then the ring bounced around a bit, going from owner to owner, corrupting this one little fellow called Smeagol, who turned into this little husk of a creature called Gollum, before it eventually found its way into the hands of a young hobbit called Bilbo Baggins, who was the star of the Hobbit book. Even when you read The Hobbit, he finds the magic ring that in that book is just used for him to turn invisible and help him out of sticky situations. By the time the Lord of the Rings rolls around, though, that ring has helped Bilbo to live far longer than he should. It is also starting to twist his mind. It's the Gandalf the Grey, a very wise wizard who was there in The Hobbit, realizes, oh man, this magic ring that Bilbo has, that might be the ring. That's insane. We got to do something about that. Eventually, that something is Frodo Baggins, Bilbo's nephew, who takes a hold of that ring and says, all right, I will take it to the fires of Mount Doom where it was created, which is the only place it can be destroyed. Little fellowship is formed around him of a bunch of very likable characters. His loyal friends, Samwise Gamgee, their two hobbit friends, Merry and Pippin, Gandalf, of course. From the men, you have Aragorn, who is the heir to the King of Men, but at the moment he is just hiding out because of obviously what happened with the other king that I just mentioned. Another one, Boromir, who's got his own issues going on. A elf called Legolas and a dwarf called Gimli. They go on a quest together, they encounter obstacles, the fellowship fractures, people die. The story diverts into 2 or 3 separate storylines, even 4, depending who you're following. The main point to know is that eventually it is just Frodo and Sam on this journey together to destroy the ring, joined eventually by that little husk creature Gollum as a potential ally slash anti-hero slash most incredibly brought to life character that has ever been done in film. While at the same time, you've also got Aragorn embracing his destiny of being the once and future king. Got Merry and Pippin is still trying to survive out there. Gandalf is going through some things of his own, all culminating across 3 films, bringing in all sorts of characters from all different races and kingdoms to a final confrontation where the ring will ultimately, one way or another, be destroyed or destroy Middle-earth. There is a lot going on, but it never feels overwhelming watching these movies. Our core characters, our Frodo, our Sam, our Gandalf, are played very well by the actors who portray them. Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, Ian McKellen, all of them. They immediately make you like them and root for them. They are very likable characters who are also noble and pure, are just trying to rid the world of evil. And they come across all sorts of terrible creatures and bad guys, orcs, Uruk-hai, Saruman, who is like an evil wizard. And then, of course, you have the Gollum character that I mentioned earlier, who was unique for characters at that time in terms of how he was brought to life through motion capture via the incredible work of Andy Serkis. He made a little goblin-y creature, husk shell, which you would just think, okay, he's evil or he's just there for comedic relief. It turned him into a fully developed character in his own right, to a point where he even participates in Academy Awards ceremonies. It's really well done storytelling. It strips back in Lord of the Rings what needs to be told, what doesn't need to be told, what can be told in a simpler way, what requires a bit more visual representation, so that everyone can appreciate the actual gem of a story that is in the Lord of the Rings story, but brought to life on a scale that had not been seen before. I think Lord of the Rings itself existed as like an animated movie beforehand, but never to this extent. And movies in general, never to this extent did such a vibrant world be created on such a grand scale. Movies were completely shot in New Zealand, so they take full advantage of the New Zealand scenery to make it look like a whole other world, because New Zealand itself is a magical place. If you've never been to New Zealand, I suggest you go, and I suggest that to myself because I also haven't gone. And that's shitty because I live in Australia and it's literally across the lake and I still haven't gone. But yeah, you can appreciate the art and style that went into the Lord of the Rings, because this was also a time where movies hadn't completely begun to rely on green screen. As I said, Gollum is unique to the film. He's the only real motion capture sort of character. All the other creatures, especially the orcs and the goblins and the Uruk-hai, that's creature makeup, that's dressing up the actors, it's putting contact lenses on, putting fake teeth in, which means there's a sense of realism to the way they act and engage with each other that makes you feel that this is a real world that you're looking at. For the Hobbit films that came out later, of course being later, 2011 to 2013, they relied more on, okay, just put our actors in green screen. We can make them look like real orcs, but you lose that sense of originality and realism that you do get from just seeing a person dressed up in enough convincing makeup that they look the part, rather than just going, oh yep, that's a computer-generated creature I'm seeing before me. It's also got a wonderful balance of action and comedy, even some elements of horror in there too. There's tons of big spectacles, big battles. The Battle of Helm's Deep in the Two Towers is probably one of the most well-remembered battles from this series. But then you also have the comedic banter of Merry and Pippin and Legolas and Gimli, even Sam and Gollum, that make it relatable to you as an individual watching it and also keeps you laughing. So even in the most dark, terrible things that are going on, you still can have a good time watching it. I cannot recommend this trilogy enough. It is great. The only thing I will say extra though is, if you haven't seen it, I think you would either be better off watching the theatrical editions and then the extended editions, or just go straight into the extended editions and just ignore the theatrical altogether. I understand that the theatrical, obviously, people didn't want to go see a movie that went for 4 hours, so they got to cut scenes out. I understand that completely, and by and large, the theatrical films are still great. It's still well enough telling the story. Obviously, you don't feel like you're missing anything out until you watch the extended editions that were only available on DVD, that added in all those scenes that were cut out, that pushed that runtime to the near 4 hours mark. Now, you would think, I don't want to watch a movie that goes for 4 hours. That's fair. I'm going to see The Batman tomorrow, and that movie is 3 hours, and that's intimidating. But when you watch the extended editions and you realize the scenes that were cut and how they actually play into the overall story, yes, there might be one or two scenes that are just played for laughs. Like, we don't need to see Legolas and Gimli having a final chat about how many orcs they killed during the Battle of Helm's Deep. But you get to something like The Return of the King, which has the final ultimate fate of evil wizard Saruman in the extended editions, but in the theatrical, they cut that out completely and just say, well, he's defeated, moving on. But you take a villain like that that's been built up over 2 movies beforehand and played deliciously evilly by Christopher Lee, you don't want to get to that point and go, oh, I guess he's defeated. Especially when you see the actual scene that was shot that finished him off and you go, that's good. That should have been in the movie. I don't know why they cut that bit out. That one was too important to get rid of. So don't watch the extended editions first and then see what the difference is with the theatrical, because the experience will be different. You can start with the theatrical and then move on to the extended, but I do concur, and even my mother will agree with this, who has trouble staying awake in movies. Once you've seen the extended editions and you know the full story and what is missing, you cannot go back to the theatrical versions and not feel like you're missing out on a good chunk of story. It truly is a great trilogy. Greatest trilogy ever made. Wonderful characters, great acting, good cinematography, good direction from Peter Jackson. He absolutely knew what he was doing from start to finish. Good use of New Zealand, good creature effects, great epic scale, the music as well. I nearly didn't mention the music. The music by Howard Shore is one of the best soundtracks I've ever listened to as well. The Concerning Hobbits music, the Rohirrim music, the music for the theme of Gondor. There's so much stuff in here which is not only perfect and that you can listen to as ambience music while you work at home, while you're working from home, or if you're just trying to kick back and relax, that doesn't give you the chills with the use of all the instruments. I can't even discuss the instruments because I don't know music, but there is something about the Lord of the Rings soundtrack that is as unique as music from Star Wars or music from Jurassic Park, anything with John Williams or Hans Zimmer. How this stuff is leaps and bounds ahead of that, in my opinion. I will briefly touch on the Hobbit Trilogy. I don't mind the Hobbit Trilogy at all. The Hobbit Trilogy has a lot of haters. There's people who give it unfair dismissal, which I understand. It is inferior to the Lord of the Rings trilogy by a lot in terms of style and substance and effort. It reeks of trying to literally, if you've got a sponge that you've just used to clean your sink, this reeks of someone who needs every last bit of water from that sponge. They've squeezed The Hobbit dry to make it into 3 films. They obviously wanted to capture that excitement and monetary gain for having 3 films like The Lord of the Rings, meaning, of course, The Hobbit gets its own extended editions. But that's where you go, okay, this is too long. This is stalling. This is pulling things from other books that have nothing to do with The Hobbit. This is trying to put too much into reference to The Lord of the Rings. It's which is fine, but it's losing track of what makes The Hobbit a good book in its own right. However, there's still that feeling, that magic of being in Middle-earth that you get from The Lord of the Rings. Martin Freeman is a great young Bilbo. I love the dwarves, Thorin Oakenshield, Dwalin, Balin. It's all great. I am a big fan of how it all eventually builds to that confrontation between Bilbo and Smaug the dragon. I don't know if you're familiar with the plot of The Hobbit. Basically, they got to sneak in and get this dragon to stop sitting on their treasure. But with the Hobbit trilogy films, there's a lot more going on there. As I said, they've lost a bit in trying to focus more on CGI than practicality and stretching out the story way longer than it needs to be. But I still really enjoyed seeing each movie. They are still very well made movies. They still do great in terms of casting and getting you to really like these characters. The music is great as well. Not as great as the Lord of the Rings stuff, but I do like the Dwarves theme and like the song that was released with each movie. For example, I See Fire from Ed Sheeran. Like, there's got some memorable stuff in there too. And when you watch them all back to back, in my recommendation, you should watch The Lord of the Rings and then The Hobbit, because there's too much in The Hobbit that references Lord of the Rings. There's no way you could just watch The Hobbit first and feel like it's the beginning of a story. More like it's just, here's where that story you like so much began, and then we're meeting up at the end to meet. It's like a circle of sorts. But don't poo-poo it just because it's obviously got a lot of its own things going on there. It's nowhere near to the level of Lord of the Rings, but I still think they're great movies. I still enjoyed every year when it came out. I still got a lot out of it. I still think it's at least 2 out of 3 top tier movies in my 100 for sure. Who knows what's actually in my 100? I don't know. But I would be remiss if I was just going, nah, they're not the Lord of the Rings, so they're not good. They're their own thing in their own right, and I think they're competently made and worth a shot. Don't just go, I don't care. I don't like that. That orc looks like a computer. Move on it. Move past it. In summary, yes, The Lord of the Rings is the greatest trilogy ever made. The movies themselves might be the greatest movies ever made. You will have to be the judge of that yourself. Go and watch them. And for the people who do love The Lord of the Rings, I hope listening to this episode has reminded you how good it is and that it's probably been a couple of months since you've watched it and it's time for a rewatch. There you are. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. I will be back in the next couple of days for my anticipated review of the new film The Batman, directed by Matt Reeves and starring Robert Pattinson. I have high expectations for it, and I hope it meets them. Until then, I love you and appreciate you all. As always, stay safe, stay kind to one another. Stay kind to one another, especially in whatever the hell is going on in this world at the moment. We need it now more than ever. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.